The deep blackness of space stretched endlessly, dotted with distant stars that twinkled like silent witnesses to the unfolding event. The Zarkan Dominion, a powerful alien empire known for crushing weaker species, had encountered something unusual, a lone human warship floating calmly in the void. It was called ASS Titan, and it didn't move, didn't respond, and didn't flee. To the Zarkans, this meant one thing: weakness. Commander Valax, standing tall on the bridge of his massive flagship, smirked at the sight. He had crushed dozens of civilizations, forcing them to kneel before the Dominion. Humanity, he believed, would be no different. With a sharp gesture, he signaled his crew to open a channel. "Human vessel," Valax's voice boomed through the comms, dripping with arrogance. "You are surrounded by the forces of the Zarkan Dominion. Surrender now, and your deaths will be quick." Silence. The bridge of the Zarkan warship remained tense. The officers waited, expecting the usual response: pleading, desperation, or maybe an attempt to escape. But the human ship remained still, its dark hull reflecting the distant stars. Commander Valax narrowed his eyes. "Perhaps they didn't hear me," he muttered, then repeated, "Human vessel, respond, or we will open fire." Inside Titan, Captain James Carter sat in his command chair, watching the enemy fleet with cold calculation. His crew worked efficiently, their faces calm despite the overwhelming number of hostile ships. They had faced worse. "They're waiting for us to beg," said Lieutenant Harris, a young but sharp officer at the weapons console. Carter smirked. "Then let them wait." For several tense minutes, the Zarkan fleet floated in place, their weapons charged and ready. Frustration spread among the enemy ranks. A lesser species would have responded by now, either surrendering or attempting a foolish escape. But the humans did nothing. Valax clenched his fists. "They think they can ignore me." His patience snapped. "Target their engines. Fire." A barrage of plasma bolts shot through space, glowing blue as they raced toward the human warship. The energy blasts slammed into Titan's shields, causing ripples of light to spread across its surface. The attack should have caused severe damage. Instead, Titan sat there, unharmed. On the Zarkan bridge, confusion rippled through the officers. Their shields absorbed the full impact. One officer whispered in disbelief. Valax's eyes widened. That wasn't possible. No ship had ever withstood a direct Zarkan assault without taking some damage. Inside Titan, Carter finally spoke. His voice was calm, almost amused. "They just fired on us," he said. "How rude." The crew chuckled, but they remained focused. They knew what was coming next. On the enemy flagship, Valax growled. "Again, fire everything we have." Hundreds of plasma bolts and torpedoes streaked through space, crashing against Titan's shields in a brilliant display of energy. Explosions lit up the dark void, sending waves of heat and radiation outward. When the fire cleared, the human warship was still there, unmoved, untouched. Silence fell over the Zarkan fleet. It wasn't just resilience. It was something far worse. The humans were toying with them. Then, at last, Titan responded. A single transmission came through, calm and clear. "You made a mistake." Before Valax could react, the human warship moved. Fast, faster than any capital ship had the right to move. It twisted and repositioned itself, its weapons now locked onto the Zarkan fleet. Panic flickered in the commander's eyes. This was no weak prey. This was something else. Something deadly. And it was their turn to fire. Valax gritted his teeth as he watched the impossible unfold before his eyes. The human warship had barely flinched under the full might of the Zarkan fleet's weapons. It was unheard of. Shields that could absorb that level of firepower without even a flicker. That should have been impossible. And yet, Titan remained unscathed, like a predator waiting for the right moment to strike. The bridge of the Zarkan flagship was silent, the officers frozen in place, their eyes locked onto the screen. No one spoke, no one breathed. They had fired twice, with overwhelming force, and yet nothing had changed. Titan had taken everything and had not even bothered to return fire. Then came the voice, cold, calm, and filled with an unsettling confidence. You made a mistake. Before Valax could react, the human warship moved, but not like any battleship should. It wasn't a slow, lumbering shift. It wasn't a careful repositioning. It was instant. Titan twisted in space with a speed and precision that defied everything the Zarkans knew about physics. A ship that size wasn't supposed to move like that. It wasn't supposed to accelerate that quickly, turn that sharply. And yet it did. Teeth their repositioning. An officer stammered, his fingers dancing over his console. There, a blast of energy erupted from Titan, a single bright flash that tore through the darkness. It wasn't a laser. It wasn't a missile. It was something else entirely, something faster, more precise, more devastating. Valax barely had time to process what was happening before one of his cruisers exploded. Not just damage, not just crippled. It was gone in an instant, reduced to nothing more than a cloud of molten debris. One moment, a powerful warship. The next, a graveyard of glowing wreckage. The shockwave from the destruction rippled through the fleet, shaking nearby vessels, sending alarms screaming across their bridges. Officers scrambled to make sense of the impossible. They destroyed a cruiser in one shot. Someone shouted in disbelief. No, Commander. They deleted it. Another officer stammered, sweat dripping down his forehead. Valax's stomach twisted. He had never seen this before. Battleships were supposed to exchange volleys, wear each other down, force tactical retreats. But the humans weren't playing that game. This wasn't war. This was an execution. Another blast. Another explosion. Another ship gone. The officers on Valax's bridge were no longer warriors. They were spectators in a nightmare they couldn't escape. A third blast, then a fourth. More ships vanished. It wasn't just the weapons themselves that terrified them. It was the precision. The humans weren't firing randomly. They weren't just aiming at the closest targets. Every shot was calculated, picking off the most vital ships first. The ones controlling communications, the ones leading the attack formations, the ones that could rally the rest of the fleet. In seconds, the once mighty Zarkan armada had been reduced to chaos. Valax gripped the railing so hard his claws dented the metal. His mind raced, struggling to find an explanation, an answer, a plan. How? How had the humans done this? Commander, we need to retreat. The word stabbed into him like a blade. Retreat. The Zarkan Dominion did not retreat. They conquered. They crushed. They instilled fear. That was their way. That was their power. But now, for the first time in his life, Valax felt something he had never experienced before. Fear. He turned his gaze back to the human warship. It still hadn't spoken. It hadn't given demands, hadn't offered surrender. It simply waited, letting the silence stretch, letting the Zarkans drown in their own terror. Then, finally, another transmission came through. A simple, chilling statement. We are not the weak ones. Valax's breath hitched. This wasn't just a battle. This was a warning. And for the first time in his career, he understood what it felt like to be on the losing side. The Zarkan fleet was in chaos. Valax could hear it in the panicked voices of his officers, could see it in the wild movements of the surviving ships as they struggled to reorganize. His once mighty fleet, the force that had terrorized entire star systems, was now a collection of scattered, desperate warships, their formation shattered, their confidence broken. And the human warship had barely moved. The realization burned in his chest, like acid. This wasn't just a stronger enemy. This wasn't just an advanced warship with superior weapons. This was a force so beyond them that it had reduced the Zarkan Dominion's might to nothing more than a mere inconvenience. A flicker of light flashed across the viewport. Another Zarkan warship was gone, erased from existence in a single shot. No slow damage, no drawn-out destruction. just pure, surgical devastation. Valax's claws dug into his armrests. They're not just defeating us. They're dismantling us. His officers were still shouting, still throwing out desperate suggestions. We have to regroup. They're cutting off our retreat routes. Their weapons are impossible. How are they tracking us so fast? He knew why. It wasn't just firepower. It was control. The humans were playing with them. They weren't firing wildly. They weren't wasting shots. Every attack was precise, targeted, devastating. They weren't just trying to win. They were making a statement. Valax had made a mistake. A terrible, unforgivable mistake. He had assumed that humanity was weak, that they were like the others, prey to be conquered, resources to be taken. But now he realized the truth. Humanity had let them think that. They had stayed in the shadows, watching, learning, preparing. They had hidden their true power until the moment they chose to reveal it. And now, in the cold void of space, they were sending a message. The Dominion was not the hunter. The humans were. Another ship exploded. The Zarkan fleet had no time to counter, no time to defend. The battle had lasted only minutes, yet it felt like an eternity. And then the human warship did something even worse than firing its devastating weapons. It stopped. No more shots. No more movements. It simply floated there, watching. The silence was unbearable. They could have destroyed the rest of the fleet. They could have erased every single ship in seconds. But they didn't. Instead, they let the Zarkans feel the weight of their defeat. That was the worst part. Not the destruction. Not the loss of ships. But the realization that the humans had chosen to spare them. Valax's breathing was heavy. His mind raced. His instincts screamed at him to run, to leave this battlefield, and never return. But where could he go? Where could he hide from an enemy like this? A new transmission flickered onto the bridge. It was just text. No voice. No demand for surrender. Just a single, final message. Leave. The word stared back at him, heavy and absolute. The battle was over, and the humans had allowed him to survive. Valax swallowed hard. For the first time in his life, he understood what true fear felt like. And he knew, without a doubt, that the Dominion would never be the same again. The Zarkan fleet was dying. Commander Valax had led countless battles. He had crushed rebellions, burned civilizations to the ground, and forced empires to their knees. But nothing in his long, decorated career had prepared him for this. Nothing had ever felt like this. This wasn't war. This was something worse. The human warship, Titan, had barely moved since the battle began. It had not dodged wildly, had not struggled, had not needed to adapt. It simply sat in space like a monolithic executioner, firing with absolute precision. Every blast from its cannons erased a Zarkan warship in an instant. No shields could hold, no armor could withstand it. One shot, one kill. Again, and again, and again. Valax clenched his fists, his claws cutting into his own palms. His officers had stopped shouting commands. The bridge was filled with labored breathing, with quiet, horrified whispers. The Zarkans were supposed to be the apex predators of the galaxy. But now, they were prey. A cold chill ran down his spine as another cruiser, one of his best, heavily armored, battle-hardened, was struck. The ship blinked out of existence. There was no fire, no wreckage, no drifting debris. Just nothing. Like it had never existed at all. The enemy was not just stronger. They were playing a different game. Valax's second-in-command, an officer known for his cold efficiency, turned to him, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sir, we can't win." It wasn't a suggestion. It wasn't even a plea. It was a fact. Something deep inside Valax cracked. His entire life had been built on the foundation that the Dominion was superior, that they were the ultimate power in the universe. But now he saw the truth. The Dominion had been nothing more than a child swinging a stick, believing itself to be strong, until it finally encountered a beast that had never needed to roar. The human ship hadn't spoken in minutes. No demands, no ultimatums, no offers for surrender. Because it didn't need to. It was letting them understand. Valax turned back to the screen, staring at the lone warship that had dismantled his fleet with terrifying ease. He had underestimated humanity. He had thought them weak, thought their silence meant they were afraid. But now he saw what it really was. It had been patience. Humanity had waited in the shadows, waited for an enemy foolish enough to test them. And when the moment came, they didn't hesitate. A new alarm blared across the Zarkon flagship. The humans were locking weapons again. Valax's breath hitched. His body tensed. This was it. The next shot would be for him. His flagship, the mightiest warship in the Dominion, was going to be erased. His claws gripped the control panel. His officers braced themselves. Then, nothing. The human ship did not fire. It didn't need to. The comms crackled. A final message, cold and absolute, came through. Run. Valax exhaled shakily, his vision blurred. His hands trembled as he reached for the controls. The Zarkon Dominion had never run from battle. But today, they did. The silence on the Zarkon flagship was suffocating. Commander Valax had always believed that silence came after victory, when the last enemy fell, and the battlefield was his to claim. But this silence was different. It was cold, heavy, a silence born from the realization that his fleet had been reduced to nothing, not by a superior force, but by something that had never seen them as a threat to begin with. He could still see the human warship, Titan, floating motionless in the void, surrounded by the shattered remains of his once mighty armada. It had not chased them as they retreated. It had not fired upon them as they fled. It had simply watched. That was the worst part. Humans did not fight like conquerors. They did not fight like desperate survivors. They fought like something ancient, something that had already won before the first shot was fired. Valax had made the worst mistake of his career. He had survived. And now he had to explain to the Dominion why. The journey back to Zarkon Prime felt like an eternity. The few surviving warships limped through space, their hulls scarred, their crews silent. No one spoke of what had happened. No one dared. When the fleet finally arrived in the capital system, Valax stepped onto the War Council's grand chamber, his head held high out of instinct, even as shame burned deep inside him. The High Warlord sat upon the towering throne of black stone, his golden eyes locked onto Valax, with an intensity that could crush a lesser being. The chamber was filled with other high-ranking commanders, all waiting, watching, expecting an explanation. "You lost," the High Warlord said, his voice like distant thunder. "Explain." Valax took a slow breath. It was not a battle, he said, his voice steadier than he expected. It was a warning. Murmurs spread through the chamber. Confused whispers. Disbelief. "A warning?" One of the warlords scoffed. "From humans. You expect us to believe. They destroyed our fleet in minutes." Valax's voice cut through the noise like a blade. "They did not struggle. They did not hesitate. And then, when they could have wiped us from existence, they let us go." Silence. For the first time in his life, Valax saw something he had never seen before on the faces of his fellow warlords. Doubt. Fear. The High Warlord's golden eyes narrowed. "What are they?" Valax swallowed. He had been asking himself that question over and over since the battle. What were humans? How had they built such a ship? How had they developed such weapons? Why had they hidden for so long? But most of all, why had they let him live? "I don't know," he admitted finally. "But if we attack them again, we will not survive." His words hung in the air like a death sentence. The Dominion had never backed down from a fight, never feared an enemy, never hesitated to crush those who stood in their way. But now, humanity had changed everything. The High Warlord studied him for a long moment. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, he stood. His towering form cast a shadow over the chamber, his golden eyes burning like twin suns. "Prepare the fleets," he said. A murmur of approval swept through the warlords, until he spoke his next words. "We will not attack." Silence. Valax stared at him in shock. The other warlords looked equally stunned. The High Warlord turned, gazing out at the great banners of conquest that lined the chamber walls. "For the first time in our history, we must ask ourselves a question." He turned back to Valax. "Are we ready for war?" The question was not directed at the humans. It was directed at the Dominion itself. For the first time, the Zarkans were not the ones deciding the fate of a species. They were waiting to see if they would be spared. The Dominion was silent. For the first time, in its long, war-torn history, no new campaigns were being planned. No invasion fleets were being assembled. No conquered worlds were being forced into submission. The warlords did not speak of it. The High Warlord did not acknowledge it. But Valax knew the truth. They were afraid. Not openly, not in ways that could be spoken, but in the way their warships remained docked instead of launching. In the way scouts were sent, not to find weaknesses, but to observe. The Dominion had been wounded before. It had suffered losses, endured rebellions, fought against stubborn enemies, but it had never hesitated, never paused. And yet now it did. Because of them. Because of humans. Valax sat alone in his chamber, staring at the holo projection before him. A detailed analysis of the battle played on a loop over and over again, showing exactly how the humans had dismantled his fleet. He forced himself to watch every second, reliving his own failure, forcing himself to see what he had missed. There had to be something, some weakness, some flaw, some reason why the humans had been able to do what they did. But there was none. They had been perfect. That was what disturbed him the most. Not just their overwhelming power, not just their impossible precision, but their control. They had never rushed, never panicked, never reacted emotionally. They had fought like something that had already won. And then, they had spared him. Why? Why let him go? Had it been mercy, or something else? A soft chime echoed through his chamber. A new report. Valax straightened, swiping a clawed hand through the air to open the file. His breath caught in his throat. The humans had moved. For weeks, their ship had remained where it was, unmoving, unbothered. But now, Titan had vanished from its last known location. No warp signatures, no traceable ion trails. Nothing. They were just gone. His heart pounded as he read through the scout reports. The humans had not sent demands, had not followed up, had not so much as acknowledged the Dominion since the battle. They had simply left. He should have felt relief. Instead, he felt something much worse. Dread. The humans had left because they had nothing to fear. The Dominion was no longer worth their time. Valax clenched his fists. No, it couldn't end like this. He could not allow his people to live in fear. If they did nothing, if they continued to sit and wait, then the Dominion would rot from the inside. The moment they allowed themselves to cower, they would cease to be the rulers of the stars. Something had to be done. The door to his chamber slid open, and his second-in-command, Torvin, stepped inside. His expression was tense. The warlords are growing restless. Of course they were. The Dominion did not know how to be still. They needed war to survive. But this was different. Something has changed, Valax muttered. The humans, they could have destroyed us. They didn't. They could have sent demands. They didn't. His voice lowered. They left. Torvin hesitated. Perhaps they do not wish war. Valax's claws dug into the metal of his desk. No. They are waiting. Torvin frowned. For what? Valax met his gaze, his expression unreadable. For us to decide what we are. The Dominion had spent centuries defining itself through conquest, through dominance, through strength. Now, for the first time, they were being tested. And the humans were watching, waiting, not for war, but to see if the Dominion would earn their place in the galaxy, or be erased from it. The Dominion was changing. It was subtle at first, no great proclamations, no open debates, but Valax could feel it in the air, in the way the warlords no longer spoke of new conquests, in the way fleets that had once been sent out to crush enemies now remained stationed in orbit, and in the way everyone was watching the void. The humans had vanished without a word. Their warship, Titan, was nowhere to be found. No signals, no warnings, no threats. But they were still out there. The warlords would not say it aloud, but Valax could see the truth in their eyes. They feared the silence more than they had feared the battle. If the humans had continued their assault, if they had attacked Zarkon Prime itself, then the Dominion could have responded. They could have rallied their forces, strengthened their defenses, fought to the last soldier. That was what the Dominion understood. That was how they had always survived. But this was something new. Valax sat at the war table, surrounded by some of the most powerful leaders in the Dominion. For weeks, they had met in secret, away from the grand halls of the War Council, away from the prying eyes of those too stubborn to accept reality. Torven stood at his side, arms crossed. His expression was unreadable. The fleets are restless. Valax nodded slowly. They should be. The warlords demand direction. Another voice spoke. High Commander Xalreth, an old warrior, one who had fought in more battles than most could count. His voice was steady, but his golden eyes flickered with something he had never shown before. Uncertainty. Valax studied him carefully. Xalreth was not the type to be rattled easily. They want war, Xalreth continued. They do not understand what is happening. Valax exhaled slowly. Then tell them to think. Tell them to remember. His eyes darkened. Do they truly wish to test the humans again? A silence followed. No one spoke, because they all knew the answer. No, they did not. Even the most battle-hungry warlords were hesitant, not because they had suddenly grown wise, not because they had suddenly discovered diplomacy, but because fear was beginning to replace their arrogance. That, more than anything, was why the Dominion was in crisis. They did not know how to be afraid. A soft chime echoed in the chamber. A transmission. One of the intelligence officers rushed forward, his pale skin almost gray with tension. We have received a message. Valax straightened. From whom? The officer hesitated. Then he turned the screen toward them. A single line of text glowed in the dim light. We are watching. The air turned heavy. No encryption. No hidden codes. Just a message sent across Dominion space, open for all to see. The humans had returned, or rather, they had never left. Valax stared at the words, his mind racing. This wasn't a declaration of war. It wasn't a threat. It was a reminder. Torven inhaled sharply. What do we do? Valax closed his eyes for a moment. The answer had been clear for a long time now. It was only now, in this moment, that he was ready to accept it. We do nothing, he said. The message spread like wildfire. We are watching. Simple, direct, and terrifying. It was broadcasted across every Dominion channel, every military frequency, every command center. There was no way to stop it, no way to deny it. The humans had not just returned. They had never left. They had been there all along, in the shadows, unseen but never absent. And the worst part, no one knew what they wanted. Valax stood on the observation deck of the Dominion High Command, looking out over the capital world of Zarkon Prime. The great war fleets remained in orbit, motionless. For the first time in centuries, the Dominion's war engines had stalled, not because of defeat, but because of uncertainty. The warlords were afraid. And in that fear, they were becoming something new. Torvin approached him, his voice low. The Council is in chaos. Some demand retaliation. Others say we should attempt contact. And some want to surrender before the humans decide to strike. Valax did not respond immediately. His claws tapped against the reinforced glass as he stared at the stars, as if expecting Titan to emerge from the void at any moment. "Do you know what I fear the most?" he asked finally. Torvin hesitated. "That they will destroy us?" Valax shook his head. "No, that they don't care about us at all." Torvin frowned. "What do you mean?" Valax turned to face him. "We assumed we were at war. We assumed we were equals on the battlefield. But what if we weren't? What if to them, this was never a battle, never a war? What if we were nothing more than an incident?" Torvin's expression darkened. "You mean, like an insect stinging a god?" Valax exhaled slowly. "Exactly. A race that powerful, that advanced, that controlled. What if they did not see the Dominion as an enemy? What if they saw them as something beneath even their hostility?" That thought was more terrifying than any war. Because a war could be fought. But irrelevance. That was something the Dominion had never prepared for. A new alert flashed across the control panel. Valax turned sharply as one of the intelligence officers rushed into the room. His scales were pale, his breathing erratic. "Sir," the officer gasped, "another message. But this time, it's different." Valax stiffened. "Show me." The officer activated the display. A star map appeared, glowing in the air before them. A single system was marked. A system deep in unclaimed space, far from any known dominion or human territory. Beneath it, 3 words appeared. "Come and see." Silence fell over the room. Torvin swallowed. "It's a trap." Valax's eyes narrowed. "No, if the humans wanted to destroy us, they could have done so already. This is something else." Torvin exhaled. "Then what is it?" Valax turned back to the stars, his claws tightening into a fist. "A test." The humans had given them a choice. Not war, not surrender. A chance to understand. For the first time in Dominion history, they were not the ones setting the terms. They were not the ones leading. They were being invited. To what, they did not know. But one thing was certain. The Dominion would never be the same again.